most Jews, from what I understand, would have not been pro fight and cause Rome to come kick butts. Now we're going to be persecuted even more and viewed by Rome in a negative light. Like, they probably most weren't concerned, I would imagine, populace wise, for what was going on there at the Jerusalem temple. Am I right about that, at least?
Well, we don't have the numbers, but and of course the Zealots, they're called the Zealots, they lost, right? And they didn't write history. It was the people that were not, everybody wanted their own sovereignty. Everybody wanted the Roman Empire to leave them alone. Everybody wanted to be able to be in charge of their own political and religious life. Nobody wanted the Romans there controlling them. I mean, it's fair to say, whether you were a Pharisee or a Zealot or an Essene or any of the communities there. But the Jews who survived and then wrote the history afterwards were the ones who were not the Zealots. There were some rabbis who were very supportive of the Zealots, including one of the most important rabbis in our tradition, Rabbi Akiva. Mm-hmm. But he lost and he was killed. And those that survived then sort of retooled Judaism to be a non-militant tradition. And that's what that book is about, that transition in Judaism from a militant to a quietist, non-militant tradition. And then the revival of militancy in some branches of Orthodox Judaism today, and how those major things can change. Remember, I said earlier, there are vectors of thinking in a religion: violent vectors, non-violent vectors, anti-violent vectors. And those vectors become activated at different times. Christianity started out as a quietist religion, but in the height of the Middle Ages, it was the most militant of all of our traditions, where penance and what's the word for it? Kapara is coming to me in Hebrew, where atonement for sin can be achieved by killing people.
It's like, I've heard this idea where martyrs, right? In Christian tradition, martyrs will go directly to heaven for being killed on behalf of the faith. It literally reverses the role. It's almost like dying in battle or killing in battle can get you to heaven. So they just take it a step further. And then, of course, making, just war theory becomes, and it's like, obviously they're not listening to the words Jesus is saying, but they find a way in their tradition, this hagiography, if you will, to find a way to make it work and fit. I need to get that book. Let's cover a couple more books as we're leaving here, because I really want people to get acquainted with your work, and I'd love to do episodes diving deeper if we can. Ooh, Shema, interesting. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Children of Abraham, an introduction to Judaism for Muslims. What's this one about?
Well, it's not intended for conversion. It's just intended for understanding.
Okay.
So I wrote two books. One is an introduction to Judaism for Muslims, and also an introduction to Islam for Jews. So these are simply ways that one, for people to learn more about another tradition and to see how similar we are in some ways, and how our distinctions are so interesting.
Wow.
Right? So those are those.
And those are deep dives, journeys in holy lands. In light of that one you wrote a long time ago, I've recently been doing episodes talking to somebody who thought maybe Jerusalem played a much bigger significance in early Islam in the time of Muhammad. And then later, it's almost like Mecca becomes the holy city. And some of the key pieces of evidence are, when we look at the biblical tradition, you have throughout the Hebrew Bible, mostly, if we take the JEDP or some form of documentary supplementary hypothesis, it seems that Judah is like, from Judah, you'd see like the pin writers got that bias. Like, we have the holy place. It's not up there in the north where the kingdom was bigger before Assyria came and did what they did, but Jerusalem becomes the pivotal key house of God. And we see that all the way even into the New Testament. Jesus is giving a nod. Jews are seeing this Jewish tradition. And then you get to Islam, and the way that one of these people who were trying to make this argument were saying, hey, look, it appears that Jerusalem would still be this holy place, the house of God. And this is why Muhammad and them were going to try and take it and conquer it, because they saw it as this holy place. But then it shifts to this place down, we call Mecca, down in the south. Whether it was really located there or not, there are maps by Ptolemy and weird things like, where is this place at? What are your thoughts? Have you looked into this deeply, and have you given any thought on what you think is going on?
Yeah, I've given it a little thought. I haven't looked at it deeply. Jerusalem was associated with sanctity, and if you want to make a claim for sanctity, it's helpful if you can associate yourself with Jerusalem. So that's very interesting, because nothing really sacred happened in Jerusalem in ancient biblical history. Nothing. No revelations occurred in Jerusalem. Mount Sinai. Where were the prophets? Outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem became a holy place because it was the center of the nation and the nation's capital, and where the king sat. And that's probably why it became holy. So traditions then kind of grew up around it, but nothing particularly special happened in Jerusalem.
Wow.
But by the time Jesus was around, it was a very holy city. And Jesus even says, it's not fitting for a prophet to die anywhere except in Jerusalem. His whole mission in life, he was in the Galilee, in the Galilee. He only came to Jerusalem at the end. And his birth in Bethlehem, just outside of Jerusalem, some scholars say was an attempt to associate him with Jerusalem early on. So yes, there certainly by the time of Jesus, it was really important to be associated with the holy places in Jerusalem if you wanted to be, I guess you could say, understood. It would add to your credentials of sanctity. Well, Muhammad was born very, very far away. And according to the Muslim tradition, it's not in the Quran at all, he probably didn't go to Jerusalem. There's some references to him arriving in Syria. Syria in those days meant also Jerusalem. That is the whole area, what we would call the Levant. Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, Palestine. So it seems that he probably didn't go to Jerusalem, but there is an association with Jerusalem already in one verse in the Quran, which you're probably familiar with, in first verse in, I believe it's chapter 17. That's Surah Al-Isra, where Muhammad takes a night journey. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say to Jerusalem, it says to the furthest mosque. It's Masjid al-Aqsa, which means the furthest mosque. The mosque in Jerusalem today is called Al-Aqsa because it's associated with that, but it's not clear necessarily that was what was being thought of in the Quranic reference. And then there's a story about him coming to Jerusalem that probably was an attempt to associate Muhammad with the sanctity of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is considered a gateway to heaven in Jewish tradition, and it becomes a gateway to heaven in Islamic tradition too. Post-Quranic, there is a bridge that ascends in the last day from Jerusalem to heaven, and all humans, after being judged in Jerusalem, will walk that bridge to heaven, but only the righteous will be able to manage it because it's the width of a hair, and the evil sinners will fall down into the Hinnom Valley, which you probably learned about, was the place where people were burned to Moloch in the ancient Israelite tradition, and Israelites weren't supposed to do it, but probably a few did. And that became that name in Hebrew is Gei Hinnom, which is understood in some Christian traditions as Gehenna,
right?
And in Arabic, Jahannam, which is one of the words in the Quran for hell. So you traversing that narrow bridge, if you are not righteous, you will fall down into Jahannam, which is the opening to hell. So that's really interesting. So Jerusalem is quite important to Islam.
Isn't that path, that thin hair, isn't that something derivative from Zoroastrian tradition? Because I hear they had a knife's edge, and there's a lake of lava. Fire. Yeah, and if you're righteous, you'd fall in it, and it'd be like warm milk. It wouldn't even hurt you. But if you were unrighteous, it would burn away all the wicked.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the tradition, but it may very well be because we are. I don't want to use the word borrowing because it sounds like we're not independent. We're using, reusing, loving each other's traditions over and over again, and that's one of the things that makes study of religion so fascinating when we look at all this material. But I think that certainly Jerusalem became very important for Islam. Whether it's really early on or not, I can't really weigh in on that.
Last question, and this is about what we didn't talk about yet, was the pagan influence, or what we call pagan. And I'm just calling it pagan because its strict definition is different probably than what I'm actually trying to imply. We have these monotheistic Abrahamic religions, but there seem to be these outside religions. Even the Quran seems to pick up on this idea that there are, I don't know if the Quran or if it's early traditions about Muhammad. That's something I can't remember actually, but I do know there's this idea that there's pagan thoughts, practices that weren't Abrahamic that were going on around this region in Arabia. In what way do you think there was impact by them? Did they really still exist then? Or are we going to say because it was so independent and Abrahamic religion's already in there, that even these pagan practices are also in that vein of these Abrahamic traditions? Because I know if you go to certain places in the world, there might be Buddhist Jewish monks, kind of like, it's like, hold on, what? You've got Buddhism mixed into your Jewish tradition. What do you think's going on with Islam?
Well, with everything that we're talking about, there's always antecedents. So the temple in Jerusalem, the great temple to the one great God of Israel, one God, monotheist, purely, absolutely monotheistic temple in Jerusalem. The architecture of the temple is based on architecture of temples that worship all kinds of other gods. So everything is being influenced by the surrounding cultures, right? In the Hebrew Bible, there was clearly polytheistic influence. The King Josiah had to remove all these idols from the temple itself, and when he was cleaning it up. So there definitely was. In the region of Mecca and Medina in the period of the Prophet, the dominant religious practice, as far as we know, was pre-Islamic Arabian religion. So what exactly is that? We don't know a lot about that because early Islam wanted to kind of remove that and just say it was a time of terrible ignorance and until Islam came and brought light to the world.
Right.
So they didn't write a lot about it. There are a couple of works that do, but it seems that it was polytheism, kind of a standard polytheism. Archaeological digs have dug up idols that were indigenous to the area, and you can even go online and Google images idols in Mecca, and you'll see ancient idols in Mecca. Islam itself, however, was really a movement against that. So if you're suggesting that there might be so-called pagan influence in Islam, of course there's influence of the local indigenous religious cultures, but theologically, Islam is really, really quite monotheistic. It's not, it is at least, certainly more so than the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible exhibits a transition from polytheism to monotheism. And but the Quran doesn't. The Quran is quite clear about that. Yeah.
And I had Peter von Sievers on at one point where he said he thinks that the Quran is reacting to versions of Christianity that seem to be implying deicide. Christians were, they're running with their hypostatic union, theological this, theological that. And finally, you got to ask the question, hold on, we think he's God. Did God die on the cross? And so it's so reactionary to this idea that's maybe traditionally being floating around that they're like, no, he didn't even die. In fact, I don't know if that's completely reactionary because we do find in Alexandria, Egypt, we do find in local traditions that there are traditions in Gnostic literature and whatnot that Jesus didn't die and it looked like he died. One says Simon of Cyrene. Another one has, I can't remember what the other one is, but there's traditions Do you think he's onto something with that?
Well, the Quran also says that Jesus did not die on the cross, that they think he died, but he didn't die on the cross. So that's that may be a reflection of some of those traditions. That is an area that I haven't dealt with in depth, so I don't want to like venture too many opinions about that. But yeah.
I snuck in an extra question. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Dr. Robyn Firestone. I've got to read these books because I think that we could really have some fun, not only getting my audience acquainted with it and them reading it with us, but diving into the history of what you found within the Bible, within other traditions, and the traditions between both Judaism and Islam, and how it's related to Christians, all of this fun stuff. Thank you for your time. Are there any final words you'd like to say to our audience?
My pleasure to be here. You're doing good work, and you're a good interviewer, and this is a lot of fun.
I appreciate it. Seriously. I hope next time we can do this again. I will be moving to Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, go to the description, get a copy of his works. I'm going to be reading them. I hope he'll do another interview with us in the future. Check out our Patreon. We work very hard releasing early content there. And never forget, we are Mythvision. Join Mythvision's Patreon today to access hundreds of videos that I have worked hard in high quality content that are not in public domain. They're only on the Patreon. You will also have direct access to me, referring academics, questions, ideas, or just want a private chat. You have that access with me. Also, I'm trying to do more traveling to educate people from more academics and expand what kind of material I do produce on Mythvision. This is a full-time gig, and you're helping the community by joining. I'm trying to put together more to educate people who have harmful cultic practices or ways in which they're harming society. We are educating them from Mythvision on better understanding these ancient texts and mythologies and history in a way like not many shows do. So please, I could use your help, and you're going to get and benefit a lot by joining as a member.